imagine this. In the middle of one of the driest deserts on Earth, a massive river suddenly flows. Not a natural river, but a masterpiece of engineering that left even American experts speechless. What you're seeing right now should be impossible. Yet Israel did exactly that. They built an artificial river through the desert that supplies millions of people with water. How did they do it? Stay tuned, because this story will blow your mind. Israel is a small country with a big problem: water. Over 60% of the country consists of desert, the Negev. With only about 200 to 300 millimeters of rainfall per year, Israel is one of the most water-scarce regions in the world. For comparison, the United States gets an average of 715 millimeters of rain per year. But Israel doesn't just have little water. Its population is growing rapidly, from about 2 million people in 1950 to over 9 million today. More people means more demand for drinking water, agriculture, industry. By the 1960s, it became clear without a radical solution, Israel would run dry. Natural water sources, the Sea of Galilee, groundwater, weren't enough. The government faced a decision: either create a completely new water infrastructure or slow down the country's growth. They chose the impossible. In the late 1950s, Israel began planning the National Water Carrier, a project of biblical proportions. The idea was simple but extreme: transport water from northern Israel, where there's relatively abundant rainfall, over 130 kilometers to the dry south. The centerpiece would be the Sea of Galilee, Israel's largest freshwater reservoir, but the challenges were enormous. The terrain was extremely varied. Mountains, valleys, desert, massive elevation differences had to be overcome. Water had to be transported over hundreds of kilometers without major losses. The entire infrastructure had to be secured against sabotage. Hundreds of engineers, hydrologists, and geologists worked on the planning. They used satellite imagery, geological studies, and sophisticated calculations. The route was determined with centimeter precision. Every meter of the pipeline was carefully planned to minimize energy consumption while maximizing water delivery. Engineers had to account for the water's weight, the friction inside the pipes, and the tremendous pressure required to push millions of gallons uphill. In 1959, the first groundbreaking took place. The largest infrastructure project in Israel's history had begun. To build an artificial river through the desert, Israel needed materials in gigantic quantities and technology that didn't yet exist. Over 130 kilometers of steel pipes and concrete channels were required. Some of these pipes had diameters of up to 2.8 meters, large enough for a car to drive through. The pipes had to be corrosion resistant and withstand extreme pressures that could reach over 10 atmospheres in some sections. To transport water uphill, massive pumping stations were built. The most powerful pumps could move up to 72,000 cubic meters of water per hour. That's equivalent to about 29 Olympic swimming pools. These weren't ordinary pumps, they were industrial giants, each weighing several tons and powered by massive electric motors. The engineering required to keep these pumps running continuously without failure was unprecedented. Along the route, huge underground and above-ground storage facilities were built to regulate water flow and maintain emergency reserves. Some of these reservoirs could hold millions of cubic meters of water. State-of-the-art filtration technology was developed to purify the water before it was pumped into the desert. The filters had to remove not just visible debris, but also microscopic particles that could damage the pumps or clog the irrigation systems downstream. Many of these technologies had to be specifically developed for this project. Israeli engineers worked with international experts and created standards that would later be adopted worldwide. Construction began in 1959, and it was more monumental than anyone had imagined. Thousands of workers dug through the Israeli landscape. With excavators, bulldozers, and sometimes even bare hands, trenches were carved out, sometimes through hard rock, sometimes through sand that kept collapsing. The work was backbreaking and dangerous. Workers faced scorpions, snakes, and the relentless desert sun. In mountainous regions, tunnels were drilled through mountains. One of these tunnels, the Zalman Tunnel, is over 1,600 meters long and was driven entirely through solid limestone. Drilling through solid rock with 1960s technology was an enormous challenge. Workers used explosives, jackhammers, and pure determination. The tunnel had to be perfectly aligned. Even a slight deviation could cause problems when connecting the pipeline sections. Piece by piece, the massive pipes were laid. Each segment had to be precisely aligned and welded. Even the smallest leaks could later lead to massive water losses. Welders worked in extreme conditions, creating seams that had to be absolutely perfect. Every weld was inspected, tested, and certified. In the Negev desert, desert, they sometimes used above-ground channels, massive concrete troughs that snake through the landscape like a river. These open channels were easier to build than buried pipes, but they came with their own challenges: evaporation, contamination from dust storms, and the need for constant maintenance. 5 major pumping stations were built along the route. The largest, the Sapir pumping station, lifts water by 256 meters, equivalent to an 85-story building. Imagine the engineering required to push millions of gallons of water up that height, every single hour, every single day. The electrical infrastructure alone was staggering. New power lines had to be built just to supply the pumping stations. Workers had to work in extreme temperatures, over 113 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. Shifts were scheduled to avoid the hottest parts of the day, but there was no escaping the heat entirely. Political tensions mounted as Arab neighboring countries attempted to sabotage the project. Guards were posted along the construction route. Technical setbacks occurred. Pipes burst during tests, pumps failed, and entire sections had to be rebuilt. But Israel didn't give up. On June 10, 1964, the system was officially opened. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol turned a valve, and water from the Sea of Galilee began its journey south. The water flowed. It was a moment of national celebration. Against all odds, Israel had created a lifeline through the desert. And how does this artificial river actually work? Everything begins at the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel. Here, water is pumped from the lake, up to 1.7 billion cubic meters per year. That's enough water to fill over 680,000 Olympic swimming pools. The water first passes through coarse filters that remove algae and sediments. From there, the water initially flows south through natural gradients. Gravity makes the transport energy efficient. No pumps needed for these sections. When the water encounters mountains, the pumping stations come into play. High-performance pumps push the water uphill. Pressure is constantly monitored to prevent pipe bursts. Too much pressure and the pipes could rupture. Too little and the water won't make it over the mountains. The system has to be perfectly balanced. In massive reservoirs, the water is temporarily stored. This helps balance fluctuations in consumption. During the day, when farms and cities use the most water, the reservoirs provide extra supply. At night, they refill. From the main system, hundreds of smaller pipelines branch off. They supply cities, kibbutzim, and agricultural operations. Every farm, every community in southern Israel depends on this water. The distribution network is so extensive that it reaches nearly every corner of the country. In recent decades, the system has been massively expanded. 5 large desalination plants now produce over 600 million cubic meters of drinking water per year. These plants use modern reverse osmosis technology to make seawater drinkable. Ocean water is pushed through membranes so fine they filter out salt molecules. The result is pure, fresh water that's actually cleaner than most natural freshwater sources. The entire system is now digitally monitored. Sensors measure flow rate, pressure, and water quality in real time. If a pipe develops even a small leak, operators know about it within minutes. Computers calculate the most efficient way to distribute water, adjusting pump speeds and valve positions automatically. Israel now recycles over 90% of its wastewater, a world record. This treated water also flows through the system and is used for agriculture. Wastewater from cities is collected, treated to remove contaminants, and then pumped back into the distribution network for irrigation. A system of this size requires constant monitoring. The pipes are regularly scanned with ultrasound to find cracks or weak spots before they become leaks. Thousands of sensors along the pipeline constantly report data to control centers. Pressure drops, temperature changes, contamination. Everything is monitored in real time. The water is regularly tested for bacteria, minerals, and pollutants. Water quality is not just important for health, it also affects agriculture. Too much salt or minerals can damage crops. In newer sections, robots are even deployed that autonomously travel through the pipes and repair damage. These robots can identify corrosion, seal small leaks, and report back on the condition of the infrastructure. Over the decades, the system has become increasingly efficient. Leaks have been reduced from over 20% in early years to less than 10% today. Pumping stations have been modernized with more efficient motors. New filtration technologies have been integrated. What was once a technical experiment is now a perfectly tuned system, a living organism that keeps Israel alive. The national water carrier changed Israel forever. The Negev desert, once barren, is now one of the most productive agricultural regions in the world. Israeli farmers grow tomatoes, peppers, flowers. In the middle of the desert, drip irrigation invented in Israel makes it possible. This technology delivers water directly to plant roots, minimizing waste. Israeli agriculture is so efficient that the country exports billions of dollars worth of produce every year from a desert. Cities like Beersheba grew from small settlements to metropolises. Today, over 200,000 people live there thanks to water from the north. Access to water enabled industries that were previously unthinkable: high-tech, pharmaceuticals, food production. Israel became the startup nation also thanks to water innovations. The skills and technologies developed for the water sector spilled over into other industries. American engineers were astonished. How could such a small country accomplish something like this? Delegations from around the world visited Israel to study the national water carrier. The project became a model for water-scarce regions worldwide. California, Australia, Arab countries all learned from Israel. The artificial river is more than infrastructure, it's a symbol. With technology, willpower, and innovation, humans can make even the most inhospitable places habitable. Today, the system supplies over 70% of Israel's population with water. Without this river through the desert, Israel as we know it would not exist. A country that's 60% desert became a superpower of water technology. A project deemed impossible saved millions of lives.